Hi everyone, DanOCan here. I haven't done one of these videos in a while where we look back at one of the previous ghost town conventions that I attended, and I figured it was time for one of those. So this is going back to the Ghost Town Convention of 2011, which was based in Marysburg, Saskatchewan. So let me get off the camera here and let's look at some pictures and kind of take a look at some great historical and abandoned places in Saskatchewan. So the headquarters for the Ghost Town Convention was in the community center, which is that little white Quonset building you see in the lower left of this picture. But this is the Marysburg Assumption Church. Now, my understanding is that this church was built in 1920 after a cyclone destroyed the wooden structure that had been on this site. The two towers were added in 1922. I had rented a fisheye lens for this particular trip. So this is a photo I took from the choir loft at the back of the church, looking forward towards the altar, and used that fisheye lens here for a little bit of distortion. And this photo here, I really just loved the contrast of the stained glass window there up at the top and the cracking and falling plaster that had dropped down onto that pew. And then, of course, there's a close-up of that stained glass window. With the way the lighting is, you can't really see the cracked plaster at the bottom of it that much unless you're really looking for it. But beautiful, beautiful artwork on that window. And, of course, Saskatchewan has a reputation for being flat. And while that's not true everywhere in the province, certainly you can see here in this image a beautiful canola field in the foreground, that band of blue sky across the middle, the white clouds across the top, and yeah, that horizon is pretty flat there, that's for sure. And there's another look at it, or another look at a canola field, I should say, and really showing how in this part of Saskatchewan, really that whole southern part of Saskatchewan, with some exceptions, you really can see for miles and miles. This one here is the Seward School, I believe. You can see the date there, 1937. A hipped roof structure, which is a little bit different than the typical one-room prairie schoolhouse that we see a lot on the Canadian prairies. Not completely unheard of, like these do exist and you do run across them. They're just not nearly as common. One thing that is common on many of the school buildings, though, of course, is that large bank of windows along one wall. The schools at that time, of course, wanted to use as much natural light as they could since they didn't always have electricity. And shot from inside the school here, I just always like detail shots and things, so looking at the broken pane of glass here. And of course, when you have broken glass, you know that means you get wildlife and water, but wildlife in this case coming into the school. So this is a look inside the school. You can see they still had some old wooden desks in here at that time, and the desks are a very unique design with the bench in the front, and then the back part was actually a table that formed the writing surface for the person who sat behind you. So I don't know if they had a different desk that would have been at the front of the row for whoever sat in the front to have a writing surface. I assume they did, but a very, very historic style of desk. And there were still some more, this is down in the basement of the school, more of the old desks there in storage in the basement, and beautiful, beautiful artwork, and that scrolling on the sides there is, you know, a lot of things from that era were really not just functional, but were beautifully designed as well. Another look at the school here, this time getting down in some of the flowers and shooting up at the school, trying for that narrow depth of focus. One of the things I've always liked about this photograph is in the upper right corner there, you can see I caught a dragonfly in mid-flight. Sort of looks like a drone, but it's not. It's a dragonfly. And here is Brushwood School. You can see, I believe you can read the dates there, 1916, if I'm reading that correctly. Maybe, yeah, 1916 through I want to say that's a 61. Why can't I read that? Let's call it 1961. But yeah, Brushwood School, kind of hidden in behind all the trees there, or the brush. No pun intended. And quick shot from inside the school. You can see this one was obviously used as storage at some point in the past. So there's a lot of trash and debris inside. Most of the chalkboards are still intact. You can see on the upper left of this picture, though, the daylight coming through the roof there. And you can see from the ceiling and that rear wall a lot of evidence of water intrusion and undoubtedly a lot of mold growing in that building. No idea if it's still there or not. Now we moved on to the town of St. Brieux and the twin elevators there in town. Of course, you know, it wouldn't be a DanOCan video if I didn't focus on some grain elevators at some point. So these ones here, the aesthetics may be ruined a bit by the metal bin that was added on, but overall still, you know, quite nice elevators. Shot here low down along the railway tracks, getting my money's worth out of that fisheye lens with the rail ties there distorted by the super wide angle of that fisheye lens, but just another perspective on those grain elevators. And this is the Meskanaw Trestle. I don't have really great photos of this. I was kind of disappointed as I was going through my photo library. It's a beautiful, beautiful old trestle. It is the longest trestle in Saskatchewan. It was originally built in 1929 by the Canadian National Railway. Was in use for basically 70 years. The last train crossed this trestle in 1979. This is one of those places I'd love to get back there with a drone. I didn't have a drone at this point. And like I said, I didn't really capture good photos of it. It's really hard. It's so long, it's hard to capture it in a proper photograph. So that's worth a visit. Need to come back there someday. Check out other videos online. You'll find a lot of great drone video. And here we are coming up to a Ukrainian church. Very representative with the dome up on top of it, the onion churches as we like to call them. This one here with just that little wispy white cloud in the center and the end of the sidewalk there, and a little bit of power line got captured in the photo, but you know, I didn't feel like cropping it. I don't do a lot of photo editing, so sometimes those things crop in and it is what it is. Here's a closer look at it without the brush in the way or the bushes in the way. So maybe not the most photogenic church with that vinyl siding on it, but very beautiful building, wonderful architecture on these. And the Yellow Creek Hotel, as you can tell from the sign there. Always been fascinated with these old prairie hotels and rooming houses and things of that nature. This one, very typical, maybe not in the style of it. They tended to be quite a bit more boxy and square. So this one's unique in that sense, but it's very typical right across the main street from the railway tracks. that was very common in these prairie towns that had railways, that, you know, there was a hotel right across the street so people could get off the train and have a place to stay. I'm assuming this is also somewhere near Yellow Creek, just an old false-fronted building falling into a state of disrepair. Too bad I blew out the sky there on this one. It would have been nice to have that sky a little bit darker, but again, I don't do a lot of editing, and sometimes I don't do a lot of thinking when I shoot photos, but I just kind of liked the weeds, the sunlight on the weeds, the little purple flower in the bottom left there, and beautiful old building. And now we have moved on to Tway, Saskatchewan. This is Prytula's General Store. Had been, as you can see from the sign there, in operation, a family business since 1915. So this was 2011, so it had been in business for 96 years at the time we paid our visit here. And it's one of those that is just packed to the rafters with an assortment of everything random you can possibly think of. It's one of those places that you don't know what you need until you happen to find it. Very eclectic collection of things is the only way to describe it. You could easily have spent a day in this place. Here's an example at one of the shelves, and the random selection of things that are present. I do say I'm using the present tense because that's what it was at the time, but Mr. Prytula, Victor Prytula here, as you can see in the certificate celebrating the 90 years, he has since passed away since this visit that we made in 2011. Emily and I did return to this store a few years later. I want to say maybe 2017. And we had a little visit with Mr. Prytula. He was having some issues with the building. The basement was flooded, and so he had a pump going trying to get the water out of it. And my understanding is he passed away the year after we were there. So not long after we made our last visit, he passed away. And my understanding is that no one in the family wanted to take over and continue the store. So the store made it for basically 100 years and then has since closed. Love this horn just kind of sitting there, the way it was catching the light mixed in with a bunch of other miscellaneous items. So, close up looking at the front of the store. Always am fascinated when you can see things like on the right side of this photo, how there was obviously a door there at one time that's since been boarded over. You can see how the one window used to be much bigger and had shrunk. That window to the left of the main entrance door has one of the old-fashioned roll-out awnings there, just missing the fabric, but the hardware is still there. It was a great, great building, and Mr. Prytula was a very, very nice man. We had a great visit with him on both occasions of our visits. Yeah, sad that the store's no longer in operation. And just a close-up detail shot of the front door there. Moving on, another church here. I don't remember the name of this one. Don't even remember exactly where it was. Somewhere along the route. I know somewhere buried deep in the dusty archives on my computer, I still have the track logs from my GPS from this trip, so I could probably find this again if I was to do a little digging. But I like this photo. Very muted colors, almost sepia kind of tone, just looking at the organ that was up in the choir loft and that beautiful archway and the woodwork and the bending of those beams. Really beautiful church. I always did like this photo. And this is Lepine, Saskatchewan, the twin elevators of Lepine. Unfortunately, this had been a very wet year in Saskatchewan, and so the road leading into Lepine was very, very muddy. And our fearless leader, Mike, made the wise decision to not try and drag this group of us in various vehicles of different off-road capability, if you will, down the muddy road to get into Lepine. Interesting thing with Lepine, somebody, it was I believe a niece of the owners of this property, had contacted me, I believe through Instagram actually, and we exchanged a few messages because her uncle was looking at selling these elevators, and she was reaching out to see if I knew anybody who might be interested in purchasing them. So I don't know if they're still in the same family or if they did sell, but this is actually the closest I've ever gotten to Lepine. I've never had the chance to get back there for another visit, and it's another one of those places I'd love to take and fly DroneOCan around. There we go, another church. These Ukrainian churches are so photogenic and so unique. There's always a different angle that you can take pictures of. Very interesting from a photographic and an architectural perspective, and a historical perspective as well. Nice opportunity here with some light coming in from the right side, the cobwebs hanging down there. Again, just on one of those images, I just really like this image. There's just, the longer you look at it, the more detail you see. And this is the grain elevator at Reynaud. So you can see here, I had talked about the flooding and the moisture that Saskatchewan was dealing with. I don't think this little pond here is normally that high, but it was at the time of our visit. And the Reynaud elevator is an absolutely beautiful, beautiful elevator. It was a very beautiful elevator. Emily and I, on our return visit, the same visit where we visited Prytula's store, also went past Reynaud and found that the elevator had since been demolished. So this one is no longer there. Reynaud is a very meaningful place for it. It's the spot where I actually introduced myself to Emily and met her officially for the first time, and that was on this particular trip. Couple old trucks sitting there. You can see how high the water level is. I don't think those trucks are normally in the water. Love the color, love the lights. I may have been a little guilty of oversaturating a lot of my images at that time, but I like the look of it. This is a photo I would 100% hang on my wall. Another old truck here that's unfortunately was submerged and kind of succumbing to the rising of the water levels there at Reynaud. And this little church here is a little model of a church. This was St. John's Roman Catholic Church in Wilmot, Saskatchewan. This is the second day of the Ghost Town Convention. I was doing a little geocaching and solo exploration before joining the group in the morning, and there was a geocache hidden here, so I came out and found this spot. We didn't actually visit it on the Ghost Town Convention, and this one, yeah, was that church there, the model of it. The original church burnt down in 1971 after a lightning strike. Moved on to the town of Bruno. This is the Bruno Cafe. I always did enjoy these sponsored signs, the 7-Up, the Pepsis, the Coca-Colas. 7-Up is a bit more of a rare one. You see a lot of Coca-Cola, a lot of Pepsi, but not so much 7-Up. Like every good Canadian prairie town, you need to have a Chinese and Western, or in this case, Canadian and Chinese restaurant. You know, typically family owned, usually was an immigrant family from China that ran them. Always had really good food in these places. And I mean, it's very basic. It's a very North Americanized style of Chinese food. It's not really authentic Chinese food, but I just kind of treat it like its own cuisine. And, you know, it's not really a good prairie town unless you have a Chinese and Western restaurant, and Bruno fit that bill. Another one of those sponsored 7-Up signs, this time on the Bruno Hotel. So whoever the 7-Up representative was obviously did a really good job when he came through Bruno, sorry, not Brno, thinking of Czechia. And there's a shot of Bruno. Great collection of buildings here along Main Street. Different eras, you know, you've got the little town hall fire station there with kind of the little cupola on top. You've kind of got some of your 1920s, 1930s era buildings there. Just a great collection. You've got some false fronted buildings, which was very typical of prairie architecture. So again, it's a slice of life photo, not especially fantastic from a photographic perspective, but I think especially as the years go by, it will become far more interesting historically. Bruno Motors, classic service station, couple service bays. You can imagine there were gas pumps out in front of here one time. I always did have a great enjoyment of these infrastructure type buildings, the basics that made the towns hum, and old service stations always fit that bill. Another shot of it here. I took this just from a different angle, a little further back, just to capture those street signs in there and give a little bit of context to it, to kind of set it in a place and a time, if you will. Moved on here, this is Peterson, Saskatchewan. The grain elevators of Peterson here. You know, always trying to do something a little different, or I shouldn't say always, but often try to do something a little bit different with some of the photos. Putting them here behind the barbed wire fence and trying to capture them that way. You can see a bunch of our vehicles there on the left and a little corner of the Peterson elevator, and then this great false fronted wooden building along Main Street there with the old post office boxes in front. Just a classic prairie building, very ghost townish with the weeds around it. Kind of regret shooting this one with the fisheye lens and not capturing it a little bit different, but you know, it was 13 years ago, so it is what it is now. And this old church was also in Peterson. Went inside, checked it out. There was some musical instruments inside. I think some people had been using it for band practices and whatnot. This building was also suffering from some water issues and flooding issues at the time, and my understanding is that this church has since been demolished and no longer exists. And there's kind of an overview of Peterson showing the old church and the grain elevator, and kind of just to the left of center by that power pole you can see the corner of that false fronted building that I showed you earlier. So fantastic little town. Such a shame that church no longer exists. And speaking of things that no longer exist, this is the grain elevator in Meacham, Saskatchewan. So this elevator survived up until June the 8th of 2021, at which point it was demolished. It was the last grain elevator in Meacham. Meacham at one point apparently had 5 grain elevators, and this was the last one standing, and it's no longer there either. And another attempt at an artsy shot here. The cracking plaster on the side of the building, the plants there, and the Meacham elevator in the background was once a very typical view across the Canadian prairies. Now, not so much. And like I said, this elevator itself no longer exists. This here is the Sacred Heart of Jesus Ukrainian Catholic Church, as evidenced by the words on the gate. A different style, very plain church for a Ukrainian church with the dome on top. This is much more typical of a prairie church that we see out here. So, you know, that style could have been a schoolhouse, could have been a church, all sorts of different things. This one, just with that dome on top, makes it quite a bit different than the other plainer churches we see out on the prairies. And the nice thing about shooting grain elevators is, even if they don't have the name of the town on the side anymore, usually there's an old railway sign nearby that tells you where you are. So this is Bremen, Saskatchewan, along the CN line. Beautiful red elevator, obviously had been recently repainted. There is something about a classic red prairie grain elevator standing out against a blue sky that's very appealing, and this one was certainly a great one. There's a very typical scene that you see on a ghost town convention. Lots of people all trying to capture the same image. Starting on the right side here, there's Mike Stobbs, our fearless leader, and the brains behind Mr. Heated Jacket's Quebec Garage YouTube channel, so you can always check him out. In the middle there is Matt Tolton, friend of ours, currently lives in Manitoba. And on the left side, standing there behind the two of them in his natural habitat, capturing a grain elevator with his camera, is the late, great Jim Peterson, Mr. Grain Elevator himself, the brainchild behind Vanishing Sentinels, and the grain elevator community still feels his loss every day. There will never be another Jim Peterson when it comes to grain elevators. Another shot here, this time Pam Linton has joined in the group. Everyone again somebody finds a great angle, and it's like, hey, I want to get that photo too. So good times there with a good group of friends, and still see most of them on a semi-regular basis anyway, not nearly often enough, but it's a good group of people. So now we've moved on, and we've come to Zimmer Motor Products in Cudworth, Saskatchewan. And this was an amazing place, one of the largest collections of derelict automobiles that I've seen in one place in quite some time. Again, a little guilty with the oversaturation on this image, but it did allow me to capture both the interior and that dashboard. You know, I love capturing dashboards of old vehicles. That beautiful cracked windshield, the blue sky. This was an amazing place, a real photographer's playground. Just a small sample of the type of trucks that were lined up there. I mean, I don't know how many there were, but I'm sure we were counting in the hundreds. And I'm using past tense here because apparently this entire property has also been cleaned up, and these trucks are all since long gone. This one here, 1976 license plate on it, home of the RCMP. And this one here is another one of those buildings. I'm not exactly sure where this was. We obviously have left Cudworth and had been moving on down the road. Abandoned house here. And this here is the Totzke grain elevator. Yeah, this one sits on a private farmland. So this was shot from the road, from public property. And we've now come to Humboldt, Saskatchewan. So this is the evening of the second day of the Ghost Town Convention. And Emily and I were just out doing some exploration on our own here. So the Humboldt Water Tower is very unique in that it's one of just 4 that were constructed to be representative or to look like a lighthouse. And there are 4 of them in the province of Saskatchewan remaining. I call it a water tower. Technically, it's a standpipe, not a water tower, but we'll let that slide, I hope. But the other ones are in Weyburn, Kamsack, and Kerrobert. They've actually opened this for tours, and you can go inside and climb the spiral staircase that goes around the outside of the tank inside. And this here is one of the last pictures I took on the Ghost Town Convention of 2011. This is the grain elevator at Burton Lake. Emily and I were driving back out to Marysburg, and the sun was just setting perfectly behind the grain elevator here. And if you've ever visited the DanOCan Facebook page, you will recognize this. I have used this as the profile photo for that page, basically since that page went into existence. I absolutely love this photo. And yeah, great place there at Burton Lake, Saskatchewan. So I told you I had the track logs somewhere. I do have, at least if I can't find the original track logs, this is the track log, a screenshot of the track logs from those 2 days. The purplish blue line being day 1 and the red line being day 2. And I think this map really shows that if you are visiting a province like Saskatchewan, you know, you can't go wrong by just following the old rail lines. You follow those and you're bound to find something, usually every 6 to 8 miles. So it's a great way if you're in a new area and you want to find ghost towns or abandoned places. Follow the train tracks, or at least follow where the train tracks used to go. They will not steer you wrong. And finally, there is the group shot of the crew that was there for the 2011 Ghost Town Convention. And that was taken outside the church in Marysburg. It was a great group of people. We had a wonderful time, probably in terms of the group and the cohesiveness of the group. I think this was probably one of the best groups that was ever assembled by Mike. And I'm not just saying that because I happened to meet my future wife at this event. So yeah, that was a great experience. Hard to believe it was 13 years ago now. And like I said, a lot of those places that we visited don't exist anymore. But that's what happens when you're photographing the forgotten and the abandoned and the historic. So I hope you enjoyed this look back at the summer of 2011 and 2 fantastic days exploring small towns, ghost towns, abandoned places, churches, schools, you name it. We saw it on this trip. Saskatchewan's a great province. You owe it to yourself to visit if any of this stuff is of interest to you. So thank you very much for watching, and we will see you in the next video.